Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of Docker series on our channel CloudSewa. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what a Docker file is. So we'll be having a brief introduction about that, and we'll also discuss about the roles of a Docker admin, and also we'll see how to build a custom image by the use of Dockerfile. Now let's get started with Dockerfile. Dockerfile is a text document which is the collection of all the Docker commands. So it also helps user to assemble the set of instruction or set of codes to a Docker image. Users can also use build commands to create an automated build that executes several command line instructions in succession to create a Docker image. We might be wondering where the use of the Dockerfile comes in the real-world scenario. If you ever face a job entitled as Docker admin, which is under the wing of DevOps, so if you ever encounter that job title, which is quite related to Dockerfile, if that ever exists, their main responsibility regarding the Docker file is to create custom images. They also help developers to create Docker images from their source code. Now let's dive in deeper about the concept of Dockerfile and what are the components that resides within the Dockerfile and how to use that Dockerfile to build a custom image. So let's talk about what are the components inside of the Dockerfile. So at first, I'd like to tell you that Dockerfile, it might be condensed to a little amount of set of instruction, which could be a 2-line to 3-line. So, but it can also be built in a matter to comprise of a multiple page script. So let's start with the components. We have a from component which describes a minimal distribution of OS, so which OS is there and what are the packages that resides in that OS. It specifies the version, which commands and functionality is needed to run for the image. So it is also followed by a release version. So let me give you an example. So it might specify from Alpine semicolon and 3.4, that is the release version of the Alpine, and Alpine is the minimal distribution. So you have that env component which describes the environment variables, which contains the keys and values for building and running application. We also have the run component which executes shell commands while building the application. We use this component if we need to install a repository or we need to unzip anything you need to do inside the container. We use the run component. We also have another component known as expose. So what it does is basically it opens up the TCP or UDP port for the communication medium. So by the default, these two ports are not opened in the container. We also have the CMD component with the run component, which executes the shell commands as the container builds, and we use this component if we are ever to install the repository, unzip and do certain things which resides inside of the container. And moving on to further, we have the expose component, which opens up the UDP and TCP port for the communication medium. And we also have the CMD component, which is the final command that will be run every time we run a container from the image. Either we restart a stop container or we create a new container. This is the final command that will run. So we also have to keep that in mind, that if these components are not kept in order while building a Docker file, you will be facing multiple errors. In our previous lab and demonstrations, we have learned and saw the process of pulling an Nginx image and hosting it to our local host. And now in this scenario, I have a Docker file that composes of all the parameters that's required to create our own custom Nginx emails, and we will be creating our Nginx emails, and we will be running it for our container and seeing what it outputs on our browser. So let me get on with that. So here I have the Docker file. So I'll just move on to my text editor and open up my Docker file. So as you can see, I have the from component, and I've used Debian and the version release version to be stretch slim. So we have the environment variables, and I'm assigning it to Nginx. So I have the run component, which is running all the shell scripts. Okay, and I also have another run component. So what it basically does, I have separated it to link it everything to std out for the log files, and I have exposed the 80 port and the 443 port. So this is the http port and this is the https port. So I've also mentioned the cmd, and now this is the finalized Docker file, a sample Docker file, which will create a custom Nginx page. So I will be running this Docker file. So let's see what it does. So let's get out of this text editor, and now let's create the custom image from our Docker file. So for that, I'm going to type the command docker image build followed by a -t and the name of our image. So let's name it as Nginx custom, and I'll have to provide the path location. For that, I'll be giving my current directory, which is signified by a dot. So let's get on with that. And I have to tell you one thing, that I've also focused you previously saying that we have to include the components in the Docker file in a old-fashioned, a ordered way. So if you break the order, it's going to create you some issues. And as you can see, while building the image, it says step 1 by 7, and here we have the first step, the use of the component from, and the second step here you have environment variables, where you are linking up with Nginx. Third, it's also the env. Fourth, it's going to be the run, and we can like go down. It's now configuring on the run. And I can tell you one thing, that we have a pretty much upper hand and an advantage of using Docker, that if you run this Docker file for the first time, it's going to take you some time to create everything, but Docker is kind of like intelligent, and after running this Docker file for the first time, it memorizes the steps, and after you run it for the second time, you can have it a little bit of faster way. So I'll be showing you that by creating the same image by the use of the same Docker file by using build. So here we have the step 5 by 7. We are running the log 1, and we are directing it to the std out. So here we have the 6th step for the exposing port of HTTP and HTTPS, and we have the cmd component. So here we have successfully built a custom Nginx image. We can also check it by Docker images. It gives you the list of the Nginx custom and the Debian. So it is the minimal OS that's required for the creation of this Nginx custom. So it has also been downloaded. So now we will run this Nginx custom and see what we have there. So Docker run, I'm going to run in detached mode interactive. I'm going to provide a port. So the port's gonna be 8080, which is listening to the default 80 port. I'm going to name the container as Nginx custom underscore container, and which image I'll be using, it's going to be Nginx custom. So this is the name of the image that we have built by the use of Dockerfile. So here we haven't provided any tag. So by default, building that, it has provided the latest tag. So even if I don't include it here, it's going to take the default latest tag. So let me run it. So we have that container up and running. So we can check it by docker ps, and here we have that container up and running, and it is listening to the 80 port by through the 8080 port. So let's check on with our browser. So let's move on to our Firefox browser. So we can type localhost provided by the port number 8080. So once we open that, so yes, we have the default nginx index.html page hosted in our web browser, and in this time we have not pulled the nginx official image. We have just created the nginx image from the Docker file. Thank you for watching the 6th episode of Docker series, and stay tuned for the 7th episode, where we will be learning about the YAML file indentation and the hierarchy. What are the components of the YAML file and how the YAML file are used by Docker Compose to host multiple containers with a single line command. So stay tuned, and we'll also discuss about the Docker Compose in depth, and we'll learn the steps about how to install Docker Compose in your Linux machine.